As there are so many examples whenever there has been changing up a wrestler's gimmick has made their performance even poor and they have getting moved back to midcard or they work as jobber. But in today's video, we'll be examining situations where a character transformation in wrestling proved successful. Join us as we delve into the world of wrestling's second chances and improved personas. From ringmaster to Stone Cold Steve Austin. Of course, we should begin at the pinnacle when discussing successful gimmick transformations. Few examples can match the evolution of the ringmaster into Stone Cold Steve Austin. When Steve Austin joined the WWF in late 1995, his prospects initially appeared less than promising. He was cast as a proficient technical wrestler who rarely spoke and constantly displayed Ted DiBiase's $1 Million title. While this could have sufficed for an average wrestler to secure a spot on the roster, it was clearly inadequate for the man who would later become the industry's biggest draw. Thankfully, as 1996 progressed and DiBiase departed from the company, Austin was given more microphone time and began altering his appearance. He shaved his head and grew a goatee to resemble notorious figures like the Hitman and the Iceman, Richard Kuklinski. But the transformation didn't stop there. Austin also crafted a new moniker for himself, one that better aligned with his newfound, colder, and more assassin-like persona. Where did this moniker originate? Well, one morning, while making a cup of tea, Austin's wife, the English-born Jeannie Clark, suggested he drink it before it got stone cold. From that moment, Stone Cold Steve Austin was unleashed, and he rapidly ascended the ranks, culminating in his victory at the King of the Ring in June. It was at this point that he fully embraced the character that would later become legendary. When he delivered his iconic Austin 3:16 promo, he transformed into the ultimate anti-hero in the eyes of fans. He perfectly embodied the shifting pop culture landscape of the 90s. Although the company continued to push him as a villain for a while, this new persona eventually catapulted him to unprecedented popularity in the world of wrestling. From Rocky Maivia to The Rock. While Stone Cold Steve Austin was undoubtedly a fan favorite around the turn of the millennium, another figure who could compete with his level of fan support was Rocky Maivia, who would later transform into The Rock in 1997. It's easy to look back now and assume that Dwayne Johnson was destined for mega-stardom, given his undeniable charisma during his early WWF run. However, that wasn't the case. Despite being an athletic performer with immense potential, none of his cocky charms could shine through under the Rocky Maivia gimmick, which portrayed him as the blandest and most squeaky clean babyface imaginable. He simply smiled and tried his best, and this approach quickly led to a backlash from fans during the first half of 1996. Signs reading, "Die Rocky Die," in the crowd were not uncommon. Fortunately, an injury sidelined Rocky in April 1996, providing the opportunity to reassess his character. During this period, both he and Vince McMahon decided that the best way forward was to embrace the fans' reactions and turn him into a heel. This turned out to be a brilliant decision, as upon joining the Nation of Domination and rebranding himself as The Rock, Dwayne Johnson could finally unleash his cocky charms in the form of compelling heel promos. Whether he was mocking fans by calling himself the People's Champion, raising an eyebrow to disdain all who opposed him, or delivering devastating promos without saying a word, simply by rolling his eyes, it became evident that The Rock was destined to be the future of the company. As The Rock's popularity soared, WWE had no choice but to turn him into a babyface, which proved to be a fortuitous move. When Steve Austin suffered an injury in late 1999, the Great One was there to step up and become the face of the company, surpassing even the Rattlesnake's mainstream stardom. This eventually paved the way for his transition into a successful Hollywood career, where, by the 2010s, he would become the world's biggest movie star. It's fascinating to think that none of this might have happened had he not made the pivotal decision to turn heel back in 1997. However, not every upgraded gimmick achieves the same level of success as The Rock's transformation. That being said, it's essential to recognize that these other attempts, while they may not have led to Hollywood careers, have been successful in their own right. Comparing all of them to The Rock's success wouldn't be fair, as each has its own unique impact and story to tell. From Max Dupree to LA Knight. A prime example of a new character successfully revitalizing someone's career can be found in the case of Max Dupree reverting back to his previous LA Knight persona in 2023. While it's true that he had already portrayed LA Knight before this change, it essentially marked a return to a persona that had been significantly more beneficial for his career. This shift allowed him to once again showcase his verbal skills, a true strength of LA Knight. He had demonstrated his prowess not only during his stints in TNA and NWA but also throughout his time on NXT in 2021 and 2022. However, when he was promoted to the main roster the following year, he was rebranded as Max Dupree, the manager of the Maximum Male Models. While we hold no reservations about praising Marseille and Mansoir, our fabulous fashion figures, this new gimmick labeled him as a comedy character right from the start. Fortunately, once Triple H assumed creative control later that year, Max Dupree was consigned to history, and LA Knight returned, ready to address fans with his trademark catchphrase, "Let me talk to you." With this resurgence, he has regained the ability to be taken seriously, raising the prospect of further advancements up the roster and even potentially capturing some main roster championships. Nevertheless, he'll encounter stiff competition on the roster as he pursues those goals. From Festus to Luke Gallows. Moving on to another mid-card star who, despite being in the later stages of his career, continues to strive for another championship. In Luke Gallows' case, it's more likely that he'll target tag team title belts at this point. However, his ascent to this stage might not have been possible without his transformation from the Festus persona in 2009. Yes, Festus was undeniably one of the worst gimmicks of the 2000s. What made it so terrible was that Gallows portrayed a mentally challenged man who appeared catatonic outside of the ring. But once the bell rang, he transformed into a rampaging monster who could plow through opponents with ease. This gimmick clearly had a limited shelf life. Therefore, it was a positive development when, after a brief stint as Festus, he was drafted into CM Punk's Straight Edge Society. The entire gimmick was retconned to suggest that he had been an addict who needed to get clean. Once he did, he returned to using his real name, Luke Gallows. This change was a game changer for his career. No longer burdened by the budget Eugene gimmick, he was able to establish himself as a popular mid-card performer. By the 2010s, he had teamed up with Carl Anderson and joined the Bullet Club in Japan, a membership he still maintains to this day, even though he's back in WWE. From Hulk Hogan to Hollywood Hogan. Many fans still consider the original to be superior, and that original incarnation would never have come to be if it weren't for Hulk Hogan's transformation into Hollywood Hogan and the inception of the NWO in 1996. This transformation was much needed as, by the mid-90s, the Hulkamania character was struggling to maintain its appeal. After years of sticking to the same shtick, Terry Bollea was losing his grip on the audience. Fans were growing weary of him, which resulted in him being frequently booed at shows. It was only after he signed with WCW and realized the need for a change that things began to shift. Hogan took a daring step based on the advice of Eric Bischoff. At the 1996 Bash at the Beach, he shocked the world by turning heel. He solidified this heel turn by dropping a big leg on Randy Savage and aligning himself with Kevin Nash and Scott Hall. This shocking move drew an incredible amount of heat from fans. While they might have been tired of Hogan's previous persona, they suddenly remembered how significant a part of their childhood he had been. However, that was only the beginning of the betrayal. Hogan went on to rebrand himself as Hollywood Hogan and became the leader of the New World Order (NWO). He spearheaded an invasion of WCW, an angle that turned out to be massively successful and propelled WCW to 83 consecutive weeks of ratings victories over their competition. This transformation not only revived Terry Bollea's career but also made him more relevant than ever. Just like the concept of Fat Elvis and Skinny Elvis, both Hollywood and Hulk Hogan hold equal importance in terms of their impact on pop culture. Given the iconic status of the babyface side of his character in the 1980s, this is quite an impressive feat. Even today, you're just as likely to spot someone wearing an NWO t-shirt as you are a Hulkamania one. From Vinny Vegas to Diesel. Kevin Nash is not the only original NWO member who managed to resurrect his career through an upgraded gimmick. A couple of years before the NWO era, Nash underwent a transformation, shedding the Vinny Vegas persona to become Diesel. However, this shift required him to switch employers since his first stint with World Championship Wrestling (WCW) had seen him burdened with a series of lackluster characters, including Oz and Master Blaster Steel. He was then tasked with portraying a pseudo-mobster, a role that, while initially enjoyable, did not position him as a main event player. Recognizing the limitations of his career prospects in Atlanta at the time, Nash accepted an offer from the WWF in 1993. He transformed himself into Diesel, a character initially positioned as a mid-card bodyguard for Shawn Michaels. However, Nash's breakout performance at the 1994 Royal Rumble prompted Vince McMahon to recognize that he had a new top star in his midst. Consequently, by the end of the year, Diesel had emerged as a solo act and defeated Bob Backlund in a lightning-fast 8 seconds to claim the WWF Championship. This catapulted him to stardom, and he became a significant draw. When Nash later returned to WCW in 1996, he was able to secure a lucrative contract, much to the chagrin of some of his peers who felt they had to work twice as hard for half the rewards in comparison. From Booker T to King Booker. Booker T didn't have to worry too much because when he joined WWE and transformed into King Booker, he was already on the path to reaching the main event. But you might ask, wasn't Booker T already impressive before this transformation? Indeed, he was a fantastic 5-time WCW champion, and he excelled as an upper mid-card talent in WWE after signing with them in 2001. However, it wasn't until 2006, when he won the King of the Ring and became King Booker, that he reached a level where Vince McMahon finally recognized him as top championship material. By embracing his comedic talents and adopting a comically exaggerated English accent, King Booker became everything fans knew he could be, the most entertaining character on SmackDown. And it wasn't just Booker, he had a court around him consisting of Queen Sharmell, Sir William Regal, Sir Finlay, and Hornswoggle. With this entourage, the Houston native shone in a way he hadn't before, capturing Vince McMahon's attention. This success in getting Vince on his side led to Booker being awarded the World Heavyweight title for the latter part of that year. While he was already a great talent, as we know, WWE is often about what Vince McMahon wants, and winning him over turned out to be the crucial piece of the puzzle for the former WCW champion. However, not every remarkable gimmick upgrade has found it as easy to win over the boss. From Matt Hardy to broken Matt Hardy. Sometimes, no matter how great something is, Vince McMahon just doesn't seem to understand it. A prime example of this can be seen in the way he handled Matt Hardy when he introduced his broken character to WWE in 2017. Before that, though, broken Matt Hardy was arguably the pinnacle of Matt's career. For the first time, he stepped out of his brother Jeff's shadow and demonstrated that he had what it took to become a major star in his own right. In 2016, after enduring numerous head blows during his time in TNA, he returned with a bizarre persona, seemingly convinced he was an anime supervillain who spoke with an inexplicable English accent and had a distinctive gray streak in his hair. Beyond his fixation with deleting his opponents, most notably his brother Nero, Broken Matt built an entire universe of oddities around him. This extended to the inclusion of his real-life father-in-law Senor Benjamin, his personal drone Vanguard 1, and his son King Maxwell. Initially, many were unsure of what to make of this eccentric character, but once everyone had the opportunity to witness the final deletion, a precursor to the cinematic matches that became a staple in 2020, they fully embraced Matt Hardy's vision. The success of this gimmick change was so remarkable that it continued when Matt left TNA and joined WWE again in 2017, this time under the slightly altered moniker of Woken Matt Hardy. When the former tag team champion moved to AEW in 2020, he brought the Broken Universe with him, participating in further cinematic matches against opponents like Sammy Guevara. While this certainly qualifies him as one of the most successful figures when it comes to getting a supernatural gimmick over, he isn't at the very top of that list. From Mean Mark to The Undertaker. In reality, there's only one man who can claim that spot, and it's Mark Calloway. When he transformed from Mean Mark to The Undertaker in 1990, it forever changed the wrestling landscape. It's arguably the greatest gimmick in wrestling history. But his journey didn't always start with such an iconic character. In his early days with WCW, he was known as Mean Mark Callis, essentially just a tall red-headed guy who briefly teamed up with Dan Spivey to form the Skyscrapers. After being told by Ollie Anderson that no one would pay to see him perform, the future world champion took it as a sign to try his luck elsewhere. He made the leap to the WWF, and despite initial concerns that he might be playing an Eggman, Mark got the role of a lifetime as The Undertaker. The Undertaker, especially in those early years, was portrayed as an undead zombie mortician. Without context, it might sound like the silliest idea ever, and had it been anyone else in the role, it likely would have failed. However, with Mark Calaway at the helm, The Undertaker evolved into the longest-running and most successful gimmick in WWE history. He was still competing in matches as late as 2020. After debuting at the 1990 Survivor Series, the Phenom became a global sensation. Despite initially being positioned as the next big heel monster, he soon turned babyface and became an anti-hero, loved by goth kids everywhere. Over the next couple of decades, he transformed the character from a mortician to the Lord of Darkness, a cult leader, a biker, and the last outlaw, with each incarnation proving just as successful as the last. In terms of an upgraded gimmick, it's challenging to argue that it isn't the most successful of all time. Mark Calaway, as The Undertaker, boasts a record of 7-time world champion, 2-time Wrestling Hall of Famer, and a 5-time WrestleMania main eventer. While not every upgraded gimmick can reach the heights of The Undertaker, it doesn't mean they lack their own merits. For instance, taking a tag team that started as mere lackeys to the Phenom during his Lord of Darkness days and transforming it into one of the most enduring gimmicks in WWE history is no small feat. From Acolytes to APA. In the case of the Acolytes becoming the APA, it couldn't have been anything less. Initially, Bradshaw and Farouk joined forces to serve as the resident muscle for the Ministry of Darkness in 1999. However, their partnership quickly evolved into a genuine kinship, and when the ministry fell apart later that year, they decided they wanted to continue teaming up. While Vince McMahon agreed with their desire to team, he had different plans for their characters. He no longer wanted them to portray the Acolytes. Instead, he looked to the age-old adage that the best wrestling characters are essentially real people with the volume turned up. So, who were the real Bradshaw and Farouk? They were hard-drinking Southern guys who loved a good brawl, and that's precisely what they became on screen. As they formed the Acolyte Protection Agency (APA), they found themselves in an amusing predicament. Their new gimmick allowed them to sit backstage, playing cards and enjoying a drink while waiting for someone to hire their services. Whenever someone sought their assistance, the APA accompanied them to the ring, acting as their personal security detail. This led to some memorable segments in which the former Acolytes utterly demolished unfortunate heels who had crossed their clients. Following the in-ring action, they'd return to their makeshift office backstage and celebrate with a few more beers. In this sense, the transformation worked as an upgrade, not just for fans but also for the performers themselves, as they got to enjoy being paid for such a fun role. However, the APA wasn't the only entertaining tag team in WWF at that time. While Bradshaw and Farouk were engaged in their card games and drinks backstage. From Too Much to Too Cool. On another part of the show, Too Cool were dancing with all their hearts. However, it hadn't always been this way for them. When Scott Taylor and Brian Christopher initially joined forces in 1998, they were known as Too Much, and this partnership didn't really allow them to showcase much of their character. In essence, they were mostly presented as undercard jobbers. Come late 1999, a transformation occurred. They rebranded themselves as Scotty 2 Hottie and Grandmaster Sexay, respectively, and became Too Cool. This change finally allowed them to let their personalities shine. Their personas revolved around being two white boy dancers who believed they were the coolest people in the room, despite the reality being quite different. Over time, as fans began to embrace Too Cool's entertaining antics, they actually became as cool as they thought they were. A perfect example of this is the worm dance move, which resonated with late 90s kids. Aside from The Rock's People's Elbow, few finishers as ridiculous as the worm have become as popular. When Rikishi joined the group, turning it into a trio, their popularity soared even higher. Suddenly, this once undercard comedy act was elevated to the main event scene, where they challenged the likes of D-Generation X on episodes of Raw. They even stole the show at the 2000 Royal Rumble with a dance break right in the middle of the match. This goes to show that even if you start at the bottom, one successful gimmick upgrade can propel you to the stars.